everybody! I'm InTheLittleWood, also known as Martin, and today we may finally finish the user interface blog post in one of these videos. I'll be sad to see it go. But as always, we're going to overanalyze every single word, screenshot, tweet, and concept drawing. Let's go. So before we delve into the inventory and crafting, let's quickly address some of the key features that we can see on the overlay. Firstly, it seems as though in the world of Orbis, we are going to be given a compass at the top of the screen. Whether this is going to be granted by default or you have to craft one to be able to utilize it, we don't currently know. My guess is that we'll be able to toggle it on and off in the settings page, and it's going to be there all the time if we toggle it on. Now, I know not everybody's going to want that because they might want like a completely clear UI, which is totally understandable, but I think for the customization of markers that we can place on the map, this is going to be a really nice way for them to appear on the screen without being too overbearing with giant columns of light. In the bottom right corner, we can see a couple of menu icons as well, so pretty simple. We've got M for map, standard. We covered that in the last video. L is likely going to be taking you to your quest log, and the fact that we need one of these has me really excited about the volume of content that's going to be inside of this game. If it was just a case of each zone had one overarching goal of defeat the Sand Empress, then there wouldn't be much need for one of these, would there? So it's making me really hopeful that there's going to be a ton of odd jobs that need doing, little faction wars that we need to get involved in, and I think this is ultimately going to push us closer towards that vibe of like The Witcher and other RPGs, like, you know, an MMO style. Next to that is E for inventory. That's a nice familiar key, isn't it? And then wrapping it up, we have got T, which I'm guessing with the handshaking symbol can only mean trading. Now, if trading is a functionality between human players, I do wonder if there'll be any restrictions in place as to what you can trade. I'm just thinking back to the old days of RuneScape and a couple of other games as well, where initially you could trade super valuable items for an egg. You know, like you could literally trade 1 gold and get 1,000,000 golds worth of stuff. But as time went on and these games started to develop their own economies, or really the servers grew their economies, we started to see equivalent exchange being enforced, which basically meant that you couldn't trade with somebody unless their item wasn't out of a certain range in terms of value from yours. Let me make one thing clear though, I don't think they're going to enforce this inside of adventure mode. If you're inviting a friend into your world, I'm sure you can trade as much or as little as you would like, but I'm thinking of people that are going to try and run these MMO style servers, or even minigame servers where they reward you with items and prizes and things like that. Maybe that's a functionality that will be accessible. Now, on the topic of the trade key, with it being so prominent in the hotbar, I imagine that's going to be on your screen all the time when you're playing the game, which means you're probably going to be using it a lot, right? I know it sounds silly, but I would actually really like to trade NPCs when it comes to handing in quests to get my quest rewards. Like, imagine like a human timing on the robot's part. Like, you put your item in and it sort of stops for a moment and goes, "Yep, that's what I wanted, thanks hero." And then after a few seconds you then see the item appear in the trade window, they confirm the trade, you do the same as well, quest complete. I know it's a tiny little detail and it probably won't be added into the game, but I just think it would breathe a little bit of life into the characters and help with that immersion. Now it is time to get onto the juicy stuff. Let's tackle the character sheet. So we should probably start off by pointing out that Kalos as a character already looks quite busy. All the clothing and stuff is just really kind of eye-catching. There's a lot going on, and I'm wondering if when you actually equip this armor and stuff, whether it would get a little bit messy and clash too much. My hope is that if you find an armor piece that you absolutely love or you absolutely despise, that you'll be able to hop back out to the main menu and edit your base avatar to complement it. Because I doubt you would want a long coat hanging out the bottom of your chest plate covering up those rad new leggings of Gaia that you've just acquired. On that same note, I know it's always been a massive plus for players if they can actually toggle the visibility of armor pieces on or off. I mean, even in this screenshot right here, they could even utilize those little diamonds that are branching off from each one of them. Maybe when you click on the diamond and it fills it with the green one, similar to the world gate that we discussed in the previous video, that is the armor piece visible. And when it's grayed out, like its current state right here, then the piece of armor is invisible. Or worst case scenario, it doesn't need to be that visual. You can just right click on the piece itself, press hide, and everything's good. Now, before you type in the comments, I know this shouldn't be allowed in PvP environments, as you need to be able to see what the other player is wearing in order to assess the situation to know whether you're going to engage them, flee from them, or just play it a little bit safer. This would strictly be a cosmetic thing for the adventure mode and maybe certain kinds of PvE servers. Beneath that, we've got 4 spaces for accessories. Now, I know that they all look like rings, but I'm going to hazard a guess that you can wear other things as well. I'm talking belts, boots, bracers, all that kind of stuff. Basically, various different types of clothing pieces that will grant you any number of buffs or enchantments. If that was the case, though, I'm guessing you couldn't wear like 3 different kinds of boots. It would either be limited to 2, imagining then you're wearing like an odd one on each foot, or it would just be a strict rule of 1 boot, 1 belt per person. Having said that though, I think rings, you could probably wear 4 of them, and even bracelets as well. Go nuts. But it's the icon in the center that I'm really interested by. Now this could simply be a placeholder image for now, and it might have a more obvious purpose later on. It could be there just to fill the gap between the 4 so it fits nicely on the page, but realistically, it wouldn't look that odd if all 4 accessories were just huddled together in the center. I think that you're going to be able to equip one really powerful item per person. Whether you want to call it an artifact or an elemental bead, whatever form it may take on in this game, you could only use one of them at a time and it would grant a really powerful buff. And I would assume that these are the sorts of things you would acquire from dungeons or major boss battles. Moving down from here, and we have got the classic HP icon of a heart, and the 100-100 meaning that Kalos is in pretty good shape right now. Next to that, we've got another little heart, and it's got a tiny plus next to it, which I think would mean certain types of gear can grant you more health, as well as potions maybe giving you a temporary buff, and the same with maybe food as well. They would all provide additional HP to your character. What I'd really like to find out though is whether 100 health is going to be the base HP for the entirety of the game, because I mean in Minecraft your character's base stats never get any better, do they? If you die, you respawn naked and you're just as vulnerable as a brand new player who's only just loaded up the world. So we could go down that Minecraft vulnerability route, or maybe there'll be a leveling system in Hytale. Now I have searched for the word level across the entirety of the Hytale website, and the only results that ping up are in the context of phrases like taking things to the next level and things like that. So as it stands at the moment, there are no hints towards any kind of leveling system that you see in other RPGs, but maybe we'll find out more in the future. Moving along to the right ever so slightly, and we have got this strange blue swirl icon with a very low counter of 1 out of 1. So it's been a little while since this blog post and we still don't have any confirmation as to what this is. Personally, I've been speculating that it's going to be a special ability meter. So basically all characters have a default attack they can do with the left click on their mouse, but maybe every once in a while you can do a right click, pull out some crazy spin to win move for all that massive damage. Now whether that special move would be restored over time, you have to pray at a shrine, dealing damage or taking damage from mobs to build that back up again, we have no idea. And much like the health pool, this one also has a little plus on the icon next to it, which means that certain pieces of equipment can increase this counter. The bottom 4 icons for any veteran player should be pretty obvious, right? We've got armor, melee damage, range damage, and magic damage. There is a plus 15 next to the attack damage, and because there's no weapon equip slot on the character sheet, my guess is that it's being displayed because the iron sword is being selected in the weapon bench. 15 damage seems about right for an iron sword when compared to some of the other weapons that we'll see in a moment. Alright, time to dive into the weapon bench and the various weapon types, but compared to the concept art, not all of them are represented here. Along the top you can see we've got swords, axes, maces, battle axes, and bows, but you might be wondering, where are the daggers? We've seen them plenty of times in the concept art, and there's a few points that we can make about this. Firstly, and most importantly, this is just a work in progress image. They've written that they're still debating as to whether you can even need a workbench to craft things, or whether you're going to be able to do it all simply within your inventory screen, which would benefit players worldwide. Like, it literally doesn't matter if it's PvP or PvE, doing it on the move would be a godsend. Secondly, and probably most importantly, Kalos may just not have learned how to make any daggers yet. This is a big one because not all weapon recipes are going to be given to the player from the get-go. Over on the right hand side you can see the workbench's description reads, knowledge of new weapon categories and weapons themselves can be found scattered throughout the world. This may also explain the absence of the staffs and the wands in this screenshot as well, although it wouldn't surprise me if those types of items required a separate station in order to craft them just simply because of their magical properties. And I did think this as well about the ethereal dagger that we've seen inside of this research concept art. It just doesn't strike me as the sort of thing you could just make on an anvil with a hammer. Just on the topic of magic as well, I've seen a few people requesting this, and I personally think it would look really cool to do, is forget the staffs, forget the wands, who needs a twig to help them out and cast spells? Just give us some cool looking gauntlets, not as big as Thanos, but not as tiny as bracers, and basically we could use them to sort of cast spells with our hands and just throw fireballs about the place. Now I'm really happy to see that crafting is going to be simplified. There's no need to remember grid layouts, it's just a simple 1 bar, 1 stick, 2 lever, and you've got yourself a sword. Initially I had thought that all of those 6 lit up weapons there were craftable, but after looking at the inventory, I'm not sure that's possible. Unless they're planning to smelt down the golden helmets to make that blade, I just don't see it happening. So it's safe to assume that these are all of the known recipes to Kalos currently, and Hytale are basically just teasing you with the appearance of some of the other weapons like the Cobalt Longsword or the Thorium Greatsword. I'm sure this will have completely changed by the time the game comes out, but at the moment, it seems as though one-handed swords and two-handed swords are all inside the same menu, which could get a little bit messy. Having said that though, we haven't pointed out yet that there is a search functionality in the top right corner. So we are going to move on to the next screenshot in a second and talk more about crafting, but just really quickly before we go, let's touch on the rarity system of items inside of this game. Much like a million other RPGs, we're keeping it simple and safe by going with grey for common, green for uncommon, blue for rare, purple for epic, and gold for legendary. I tell you what, if there's a world tree in this game where a massive story takes place, that legendary stone axe, oh boy, it's ready for the job. Legendary tier. I want one! This is most likely just a silly colour demonstration as they don't want to spoil the appearance of too many legendary weapons ahead of the release. Or maybe there's some kind of upgrading system, or it could just simply be pot luck. When you go ahead and craft certain types of items, maybe there's a chance it could pop out a green, a blue, a purple, or better. So we've already touched on the fact that crafting recipes can be found the world over, and that will give us more than enough reason to go exploring. Certain blueprints, I imagine, can only be looted from dungeon chests or maybe even high tier mobs. That's the way you're going to acquire them. But this next screenshot gives us a glimpse at something known as the armory. This will actually allow us to experiment and discover new recipes all on our own. I'm guessing all we have to do is throw a random assortment of items into this thing, so a couple of ingots, some leather and some wood to tie it all together, and maybe see if something clicks. Although this does potentially run the risk of being really infuriating if one decision is made. That decision being, if you fail a recipe, do you lose all of the items? My hope is no. But I can see them striking this balance, because if you could just load up a Wikipedia 48 hours after the game is launched and have every crafting recipe known to man, you could make everything from a stone sword right the way up to a giant great flaming sword of the goddess, all without ever having to step foot out of your tiny little home. So when the game finally comes out and you get your hands on it, maybe just triple check whether you need to get the blueprint first to craft something before you waste all your items. Oh my god, can you see it? We're actually getting towards the end of the blog post. Oh my god! Alright, well let's keep going. Weapon tooltips, let's dive into it. I've covered this in a previous video, but essentially the TLDR is that tooltips are simple pieces of information about the item that you're hovered over. So let's start with the Chalk Sword. So it's a common rarity item and it's a two-hander, which of course means that it will swing a little bit slower, represented by the text on the right hand side. Given that this item is just of common rarity, I'm going to assume that you can't craft these for yourself, but you could probably loot them from any chalk that you happen to down. So then we move on to talking about the damage numbers. These are the important ones. So at the moment it says 7 to 13. Of course that would usually mean, it kind of differs per game, but the general rule of thumb is 7 is the lowest amount of damage this weapon can do, and 13 is the maximum. Unless, a little caveat with that, is that if this game has critical hits, like if it has a chance of landing a special one every so often, then that could add the multiplier and it could do upwards of, I would normally assume, 26. It would double the max and do it in one go. But then we move on to the very confusing numbers next to it. So DPS is the phrase used there. DPS stands for damage per second. So if you're constantly swinging with your left click, how much damage would you do over the course of 1 second? Now for the Chalk Sword, I would have thought 9 DPS. Seems fair enough. It's kind of like the average, the middle of the two. But then there's that second number. And I was like, wait, what does that mean? Because obviously there, the second number is smaller. So I was like, right, okay. Let's have a look at another weapon. So we went down to the Fire Sword and it said 25 and then 79. And I was like, you know what? That kind of makes sense, right? Your primary would do 25 damage. When you do your special move, then it does 79 damage and it all makes sense. Wrong. Because now we go over to the Demonic Axe, that's 46 and then 15. I was like, oh, what's happening? So then I was really grasping at straws. I was like, okay, fine, 46 damage on average, makes sense. Then it will only do 15 damage on the secondary move if it has some kind of special ability that it adds like a debuff to the enemy. So I looked at the little green text in the tooltip, not really anything there mentioning that it does anything special. So then I was just lost. I was like, okay, you know what? Let's just go to Twitter. I asked on Twitter, Simon Hypixel himself tweeted me saying, it's just concept art. Everything was going through a change, don't read into it, so fair play. Anyway, let's discuss the slightly more interesting items in this little screenshot and their buffs. So first and foremost, the Fire Sword, as you can imagine, is pretty hot, and it's got a really nice effect on it of a chance to set foes on fire on occasion. That's awesome. Then we move on to the Demonic Axe, and it's got some nice perks as well, with the ability to consume the soul of fallen enemies, increasing your damage for a limited time, and it would seem as though it's on by default, because there's no mention of a chance to, or sometimes it'll happen. I would guess that this is going to happen constantly. Although to balance out that pretty hefty buff, you are going to take damage for each bit of damage you do to enemies, so that balance is then restored. The final note to make on this weapon as well is that it comes with some flavor text, and I hope loads of items in the game have this, just simply because I want more little bits of, information and lore about the game as the world continues to expand and the weapon set expands as well. So then last but certainly not least, we have got durability of the items in the bottom right corner. Again, I've spoken about this in a previous video, and we still haven't had any confirmation of it just yet, but if we're right, I'd be intrigued to see the decision made about the repair system. You might remember from the trailer back in December that there was a warrior sat on the floor at the very beginning of it, using what appeared to be a whetstone. That could act as like a mobile temporary repair system, but having a special type of workbench or an NPC that you have to visit, that'd be pretty nifty too. The big question looming over everything right now though is, once your durability hits 0, is the item going to be destroyed, or will it simply unequip? I'm really hoping for the latter, and I hope they tell us soon. Whew. There we go, we finally did it. It only took 3 videos, but we have finally covered the entirety of the user interface blog post. Be sure to keep an eye on the channel in the coming weeks when we take our first dive into the NPC's blog post, which will cover the large array of factions, one of which I've been holding on to and we haven't discussed just yet, as it's finally been shown off visually in recent days. We've got the broad range of animals that inhabit the various zones, and also the monsters we'll be slaying on all of our adventures. If you don't want to miss any of that, be sure to subscribe to the channel, ring that bell so you actually get notified when the video goes live, and leave a like on the video if you watched this far and found it informative. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye bye.